The scent of pine and frost clung to my skin as I slipped through the shadows of the great hall. Winter had descended upon the Packlands with unusual ferocity this year, as though nature itself sensed the unrest brewing within our walls. Torches flickered along stone corridors, casting monstrous shapes that danced and writhed against ancient tapestries depicting the glory days of the northern packs. I wasn't supposed to be here, not during the winter solstice gathering. Servants like me were meant to remain invisible, preparing feasts and warming beds without being seen, especially not Omegas with no familial ties to any of the 12 packs that gathered tonight. "Hurry up, Eden," hissed Mara, the head kitchen maid. Her face flushed from the heat of the kitchens. "The alphas are getting restless, and the king hasn't even arrived yet." I nodded, clutching the silver tray of rare meats closer to my chest. The weight of it strained against my wrists, but I'd learned to carry burdens without complaint. 5 years in the royal household had taught me that lesson well. Pain was temporary, but mistakes were remembered. My mother's pendant bounced gently against my collarbone as I moved, hidden beneath my simple gray dress, the last remnant of a woman I barely remembered. It bore a strange symbol, a crescent moon embracing a star. "When the world turns cruel," she'd whispered the night she left me at the pack's doorstep, "remember that you carry the light within the darkness." I was 7 then, too young to understand abandonment dressed as sacrifice. The great hall loomed before me, a cavernous space where ceiling beams arched like the ribcage of some ancient beast. Alpha leaders from every corner of the territory lounged at long tables, their laughter too loud, their eyes too sharp. My pale blonde hair was tucked carefully under a servant's cap, a futile attempt to blend into the shadows. Omegas with hair like mine were rare, considered either a blessing or an abomination, depending on which old tales you believed. I kept my eyes downcast as I moved between tables, setting down platters of roasted meats. The scent of blood and wine hung thick in the air, mingling with the musk of dominant wolves marking their territory with pheromones. My skin prickled with awareness, that animal part of me that recognized danger even when my human mind tried to ignore it. Well, what do we have here? A rough hand caught my wrist, nearly toppling the remaining dishes on my tray. Alpha Rainier of the Southern Territories grinned up at me, his teeth too white against his tanned skin. "I don't remember seeing you at last year's gathering." "I serve in the kitchens, Alpha Rainier," I murmured, the practiced response rolling off my tongue. "Please excuse me. I must finish serving before..." "Before what?" His grip tightened, his thumb brushing against my pulse point. "Before our illustrious Alpha King arrives? 5 years he's been on that throne, and what has he done but brood in his tower while refusing to take a mate?" Laughter rumbled through his chest. "Perhaps he prefers the company of little kitchen mice like you." Heat crawled up my neck, but I kept my expression neutral. Survival meant invisibility. Invisibility meant silence. "Release her, Rainier." The voice came from behind me, quiet, yet carrying a command that vibrated in the marrow of my bones. "Or have you forgotten whose hall you feast in?" The great hall fell silent, conversation dying like flames starved of oxygen. I didn't need to turn to know who stood there. I'd spent 5 years learning the cadence of those footsteps, the particular way silence followed in his wake. Alpha King Dominic Blackthorn had arrived. Rainier's hand fell away as though burned. I stepped back, careful to keep my eyes lowered, but not before catching a glimpse of the man who ruled the 12 packs with an iron will and cold distance. He stood taller than any alpha in the room, shoulders broad beneath a cloak of midnight fur. His face remained as I remembered from the rare occasions I'd glimpsed him. Sharp angles and shadows, dark hair falling across a forehead perpetually creased in thought or anger. But it was his eyes that everyone feared meeting, gray as a winter storm and just as merciless. "My king?" Rainier stood, bowing his head in submission, while his scent betrayed his resentment. "We were beginning to wonder if you would honor us with your presence this evening." King Dominic's gaze swept over the gathered alphas, never once falling on me. For 5 years, it had been this way. I moved through his castle like a ghost, and he looked through me as though I were made of air. The rumors said he hadn't taken a mate because his heart had died with the previous royal family during the Pack Wars. Others whispered darker things, that he'd made a pact with ancient spirits. trading his capacity for love in exchange for the power that had won him the throne. "The borders required my attention," he said, voice carrying to every corner of the hall without effort. "The eastern rogues grow bold. 3 villages raided in the past month." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I began to retreat toward the kitchens. My duty was done, and lingering would only invite trouble. "Stay." The command wasn't shouted, but it froze me in place nonetheless. I wasn't sure if King Dominic was addressing the uneasy alphas or me until I felt the weight of the room's attention shift. I turned slowly, eyes still carefully directed at the stone floor, and waited. "Look at me." His voice had dropped lower, meant for my ears alone, though the supernatural hearing of the alphas would catch it anyway. 5 years I had served in his household. 5 years I had carried trays past him, changed linens in chambers adjacent to his, polished silver in rooms where he held council. 5 years, and he had never once addressed me directly. I raised my eyes, fighting the Omega instinct to bare my neck in submission. The first direct look between an Alpha and Omega was said to reveal compatibility, to spark the recognition that could lead to mating. But those were stories for other wolves. Wolves with packs and futures and choices. His gray eyes widened fractionally as they locked with mine, a muscle tightening in his jaw. Something passed over his face, too quick to name, before his expression settled back into its customary granite mask. "Your name." Not a question, but a demand. "Eden, Your Majesty." My voice emerged steadier than I felt. "Eden?" he repeated, as though testing how it felt on his tongue. The sound of my name in his mouth sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "You will attend to my chambers tonight." Gasps rippled through the hall. The king never requested personal servants. He kept a skeletal staff at a distance, preferring solitude to attendance. "My king," ventured Alpha Vanessa of the Western Lakes, her tone carefully diplomatic. "Tonight we had hoped to discuss the matter of alliances. My daughter—" "Will wait," he cut her off without shifting his gaze from me. "As will all matters of politics. Tonight is the solstice. We honor old traditions." The way he said old traditions carried a weight I couldn't decipher, but the effect on the room was immediate. Alphas exchanged glances heavy with meaning, some narrowing their eyes at me with newfound interest or suspicion. "You may return to your duties until moonrise," King Dominic said to me. "Then you will come to the North Tower." I curtsied, unable to trust my voice, and backed away. As I reached the kitchen doors, I heard him addressing the hall. His voice returned to matters of territories and threats. But as the doors swung closed behind me, I caught one last glimpse of him, his eyes following me with an intensity that made my heart stutter in my chest. Mara grabbed me the moment I entered the steaming kitchens, her face pale. "What did you do?" she hissed, fingers digging into my arm. "No one gets summoned by him, no one." "I don't know," I whispered, the truth of my confusion evident. "I've done nothing to draw his attention." "Well, you've drawn it now." Her eyes darted to the kitchen windows, where the late afternoon sun was already sinking toward the tree line. And on a solstice night, no less. The cook, an old beta named Gertrude, who had served 3 generations of pack leaders, looked up from her cauldron with knowing eyes. "Moonrise isn't for hours yet, girl. Best prepare yourself." "Prepare for what?" I asked, dread and something else, something I refused to name, coiling in my stomach. Gertrude's weathered hand reached out to touch my cheek with surprising gentleness. "For whatever fate the moon goddess has been spinning for you these past 5 years, child." Her fingers moved to my cap, pulling it free so my pale blonde hair tumbled down around my shoulders. "No use hiding what you are anymore. The king has seen you now." As the winter sun sank beyond the mountains and servants lit lanterns throughout the castle, I bathed in cold water that did nothing to cool the apprehension burning beneath my skin. 5 years of carefully constructed invisibility had crumbled with a single look. Whatever awaited me in the North Tower would change everything. I just didn't know if I would survive the transformation. My mother's pendant felt heavier than usual against my skin as I dressed in my cleanest shift. "Remember that you carry the light within the darkness," I whispered to myself, her long-ago words the only prayer I knew. Outside my tiny window, the full moon began its ascent into the night sky, calling to the wolf that slumbered within me. The wolf I'd never fully embraced, too afraid of what unleashing that part of myself might mean in a world where omegas without pack protection were treated as property rather than people. Tonight, I would meet the Alpha King not as a servant, but as something else, something I didn't yet understand. And as the moonlight painted silver paths across the snow-covered courtyard, I left the safety of shadows and began the long walk toward the North Tower, where destiny or doom awaited. The North Tower rose like a specter against the night sky, its ancient stones absorbing moonlight rather than reflecting it. Few servants ventured here. It was the king's private domain, a place of whispered legends and forbidden knowledge. The spiral staircase wound upward in a tight coil, each step worn smooth by centuries of footfalls. My heart thundered against my ribs as I climbed, the sound echoing in the narrow passage. The walls seemed to press closer with each step, as though the tower itself was breathing, evaluating my worth. I clutched my mother's pendant, drawing courage from its familiar contours. No guard stood at the king's door. He needed none. His strength was legendary, his ferocity in both human and wolf form unmatched. Some said he could shift faster than thought, tearing enemies apart before they even registered movement. I'd overheard alphas in their cups speaking of battles where he'd faced dozens alone, emerging bloodied but victorious while his challengers lay broken. I hesitated before the heavy oak door, my knuckles poised to knock. What could he possibly want with me? I was nothing. A servant without pack, without power, without significance. 5 years I had moved through his castle like a shadow, and he had never so much as glanced my way. Until today. Before my knuckles could connect with wood, the door swung open silently, revealing a chamber bathed in firelight and shadow. The room was massive, but sparsely furnished, a desk covered with maps and correspondence, shelves laden with ancient texts, weapons mounted on walls beside tapestries depicting pack histories. And windows, enormous arched windows open to the winter night, allowing moonlight to spill across stone floors despite the bitter cold. King Dominic stood with his back to me, facing one such window. He'd removed his formal cloak, wearing only a simple black tunic that did nothing to diminish the raw power evident in his stance. His hands were clasped behind his back, knuckles white with tension. Close the door. His command hung in the air, quiet but undeniable. I obeyed, the latch clicking into place with finality that sent a tremor through me. The sound must have betrayed my nervousness, for he turned slightly, his profile severe in the mingling of fire and moonlight. "Are you afraid of me, Eden?" The question surprised me, not just because it acknowledged fear might be reasonable, but because it suggested he cared about my answer. I considered lying, then decided truth was safer with a wolf who could smell deception. "Yes," I admitted, then found myself adding, "and no." That earned me his full attention. He turned, eyes narrowing as they assessed me. "Explain." I swallowed hard, struggling to articulate feelings I barely understood myself. "I fear your power and position as any would, but I've served in your household for 5 years, and in that time, I've never seen you be cruel without cause." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. "You've been watching me." Heat crept up my neck. It's a servant's job to observe without being seen. And yet today, I saw you. He moved away from the window, circling me slowly. Not predatorily, as Alpha Rainier had done, but methodically, as though cataloging details he'd somehow missed before. 5 years you've been here, and today I saw you for the first time. Why is that, I wonder? The question seemed directed at himself more than me, so I remained silent, fighting the urge to fidget under his scrutiny. His scent enveloped me, pine and smoke and something wild, like storm clouds gathering over mountains. My omega senses, usually carefully suppressed, flared to life, registering his proximity with alarming intensity. "Your hair," he said suddenly, stopping before me. "It's the color of moonlight." Without warning, he reached out, capturing a strand between his fingers. The contact, brief and impersonal as it was, sent a shock through my system. 5 years without touch had left me hypersensitive, or perhaps it was simply him, the Alpha King whose very presence commanded submission. Rare, among our kind. he continued, releasing my hair and stepping back. There are stories about omegas born with moon-blessed hair, old stories. I'd heard those stories whispered in kitchens and servants' quarters. Tales of omegas whose rare coloring marked them as favored by the moon goddess, destined for greatness or tragedy, often both. I'd dismissed them as superstition, the kind that got omegas like me killed or worse when packs grew fearful of power they couldn't control. Stories are just stories, Your Majesty, I said carefully. His lips curved into something almost resembling a smile. Are they? Then explain how I've walked past you countless times over 5 years without seeing you, only to have you appear to me today on the winter solstice, when the veil between worlds grows thin. A chill that had nothing to do with the open windows crawled up my spine. Perhaps you simply weren't looking before. I see everything in my domain, he countered, voice hardening. Every threat, every opportunity, every shift in allegiance among the alphas. And yet you... He broke off, frustration evident in the set of his jaw. What pack are you from? None, Your Majesty. I was left at the borders of the Northern Territory as a child. The previous castle steward took me in as a servant. Parents? My mother left me with this. I touched the pendant at my throat, and no explanation. His eyes fixed on the silver crescent and star, a strange recognition lighting his features. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between us, fingers brushing my collarbone as he lifted the pendant for inspection. His touch burned against my skin, and I fought the instinctive urge to lean into it, horrified by my body's reaction. Where did you get this? His voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. I told you, my mother. This symbol belongs to the Lunar Covenant. He cut me off. A secret society thought destroyed during the Pack Wars. No ordinary Omega would possess such a token. Fear knotted in my stomach. I don't know anything about a covenant. It's just a necklace. The only thing I have from my past. He studied my face with unnerving intensity, searching for deception. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him, for he released the pendant and stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair in a rare display of uncertainty. The alphas believe I've brought you here as a potential mate, he said abruptly, changing tactics with disconcerting speed. The words hit me like ice water. What? Why would they think, because I've rejected every suitable alpha and beta female they've paraded before me for 5 years, he interrupted, pacing now, because I summoned you publicly, on a solstice night, when tradition dictates that alphas declare their intentions, because... He stopped, fixing me with a stare that made my knees weak. Because when I looked at you today, something recognized you. My breath caught in my throat. Recognized. He resumed pacing, agitated energy rolling off him in waves. There's an ancient ritual among pack leaders, a blood rite performed under a solstice moon to reveal one's true mate, not the political matches alphas make for power or territory, but the one soul the moon goddess has marked as complementary, the other half that makes a leader whole. I shook my head, disbelieving. And you think I couldn't even finish the sentence, the notion too absurd. I think nothing, he snapped. I know only that for 5 years I've ruled without truly seeing you, and today something compelled me to look. Today, something changed. A painful hope I hadn't even realized was building deflated within me. Of course, I wasn't special or chosen. I was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time when something magical or mystical had affected the king's perception. Perhaps it's the solstice magic, I offered quietly. Tomorrow things will return to normal. His expression darkened. There will be no normal after tonight. The alphas have seen my interest in you. They will either assume you hold power over me, making you a target, or that I intend to claim you, making you central to their political machinations. The ramifications hit me like a physical blow. My careful anonymity, my safety and invisibility, gone in an instant. What happens now? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He moved to his desk, retrieving a small ornate dagger with symbols etched into its blade that matched the crescent and star on my pendant. Now we determine the truth. If the goddess has truly marked you, the blood rite will confirm it. Fear lanced through me. And if it doesn't? His expression remained impassive, but something like regret shadowed his eyes. Then I send you away from this place, far from the politics and dangers of court. You'd be given a new identity, protection, exile. After 5 years of creating a life here, meager as it was, the thought of starting over somewhere strange and unfamiliar hollowed me out. Yet the alternative seemed equally impossible. And if it does confirm something, I forced myself to ask. He approached slowly, dagger gleaming in the firelight. Then you become the most envied and endangered woman in the 12 territories. My pulse jumped as he reached for my hand, turning it palm up with a gentleness that contradicted his fearsome reputation. "This will hurt," he warned, raising the dagger. Blood magic always does. Before I could respond, the blade sliced across my palm. A swift, precise cut that stung sharply before giving way to throbbing heat. He made a similar cut on his own palm, then pressed our wounds together, fingers interlocking with mine. The contact was electric, sending currents of sensation up my arm. His hand dwarfed mine, calloused and warm, the grip firm but not crushing. Blood mingled between our palms as he began speaking in the old language, words of binding and revelation, ancient syllables that seemed to vibrate in the air around us. I gasped as heat flared where our blood mixed, spreading up my arm and through my chest. The room around us dimmed as moonlight intensified, pouring through the windows with unnatural brilliance. My mother's pendant grew warm against my skin, then hot, the silver seeming to melt and reform, binding itself to me. King Dominic's eyes widened as he looked at me, his pupils expanding until only a thin ring of gray remained. "Moon blessed," he whispered, voice rough with some emotion I couldn't identify. The legends were true. Whatever he saw reflecting back at him made his grip tighten on mine. The heat between us built until it was nearly unbearable, my vision blurring at the edges as ancient magic worked through our joined blood. Then, without warning, images flashed behind my eyes. Memories that weren't my own. A young boy training brutally under his father's merciless gaze. The same boy, older now, watching his family slaughtered during the pack wars. Dominic, barely a man, fighting his way to power, driven by vengeance and the desperate need to prevent further bloodshed. And loneliness. Crushing, endless loneliness as he held himself apart from everyone, convinced that attachment meant vulnerability, that vulnerability meant death. From his sudden intake of breath and the shock in his eyes, I knew he was seeing my memories too. The abandonment, years of serving in silence, watching him from shadows, the careful construction of walls to protect a heart too easily wounded. "What is happening?" I gasped, overwhelmed by the intimacy of this unwanted exchange. "Soul recognition," he growled, his free hand coming up to grasp the back of my neck, holding me steady as the magic surged between us. The blood rite reveals what lies beneath masks and pretense. With terrifying suddenness, I felt my inner wolf stir. That part of myself I'd kept carefully leashed and hidden. She rose within me, pushing against my human form, demanding acknowledgement. I had never fully shifted, too afraid of the vulnerability of transformation without a pack's protection. But now, she clawed for release, drawn by the power of the alpha before me, and the magic binding us together. "Don't fight it." Dominic's voice had deepened, resonating with the alpha timbre that compelled obedience. "Let her rise." "I can't." I struggled against the pressure building within me, panic rising. I don't know how to control it." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You've never shifted fully." It wasn't a question, but I shook my head anyway, shame burning through me. Every wolf, even Omegas, should master their dual nature by adolescence. My failure marked me as damaged, incomplete. Instead of the disgust I expected, his expression softened marginally. "I will hold you through it," he promised, his thumb tracing a gentle arc at the nape of my neck. "You're safe with me." The words, so at odds with his fearsome reputation, broke something loose inside me. Tears spilled down my cheeks as the walls I'd built around my wolf form began to crumble. 5 years of hiding, of making myself small and unnoticeable, of suppressing my true nature. All undone by 4 simple words from the most dangerous alpha in the territories. I was not safe. I had never been safe. But as moonlight bathed us in silver and blood magic twisted between our joined hands, I surrendered to the transformation that had frightened me for so long, trusting that whatever came after couldn't possibly be worse than the half-life I'd been living. The shift began with fire racing through my veins, muscles contorting as bones shifted beneath my skin. I cried out, instinctively trying to pull away from Dominic, but his grip remained firm, anchoring me through the pain. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice penetrating the haze of agony. "Don't fight it." Easy for him to say. Alphas shifted with practiced ease, their dominant nature allowing seamless transition between forms. For me, each crack of bone and stretch of sinew felt like being torn apart and reassembled. My consciousness fragmented, human mind retreating as the wolf surged forward. I fell to my knees, dragging Dominic down with me as our hands remained locked together, blood magic still pulsing between us. My vision blurred, then sharpened dramatically, the room's shadows resolving into perfect clarity. Scents intensified, the cedar burning in the fireplace, the ink on Dominic's letters, the leather of his boots, and most powerfully, his own intoxicating aroma of pine, storm winds, and alpha power. The final barrier between my human and wolf selves dissolved with a searing flash of pain that tore a howl from my throat. When my vision cleared, I found myself on all fours, white gold fur rippling over my transformed body. My clothes lay in tatters around me, but such human concerns seemed trivial to my wolf, who was reveling in her freedom after years of suppression. Dominic had released my hand during the transformation, but remained kneeling before me, his eyes glowing with alpha power. He had not shifted himself, but his wolf prowled just beneath the surface, evident in the sharpening of his features and the elongation of his canines. "Eden," he murmured, extending his hand slowly. "Do you recognize me?" My wolf considered him, instincts providing information my human mind would have missed. This male was powerful, dangerously so, but the blood magic had created a connection between us that sang along nerve endings. Without conscious thought, I moved forward, pressing my muzzle into his outstretched palm. A shudder passed through his body at the contact. "Extraordinary," he whispered. "Your wolf form is as rare as your human one." I couldn't respond in words, but I understood him perfectly, my comprehension unhindered by the shift. Curious, I moved to the window, catching my reflection in the glass. A wolf with fur the color of moonlight gazed back at me, eyes a luminous gold that held none of the subservience I'd cultivated in my human form. This creature was wild, unbroken, and far larger than a typical omega wolf, though still smaller than an alpha. "The white wolf of prophecy," Dominic said behind me, his voice carrying a reverence I'd never heard from him before. "Your mother must have known what you would become when she hid you among servants." I turned back to him, questions burning in my mind, but no way to voice them. He seemed to understand my frustration, a small smile ghosting across his usually stern features. "Shift back," he suggested. "Now that you've broken through the barrier, the transition should be easier." Uncertainty gripped me. The freedom of this form was intoxicating. All the fears and constraints of my human life seemed distant, manageable. But Dominic was right. Questions needed answers, and for that I needed words. I closed my eyes, searching for the pathway back to humanity. The reverse shift came more naturally, my body remembering its original form and flowing back into it with only moderate discomfort. When I opened my eyes, I was human again, and entirely naked, my clothes destroyed by the transformation. Dominic moved with swift efficiency, retrieving a fur-lined cloak from a chest and draping it around my shoulders before I could cover myself with my arms. The brush of his fingers against my bare skin sent electricity coursing through me, but he stepped away immediately, turning to pour wine from a decanter on his desk. "The first shift is always the most difficult," he said, his back to me as I clutched the cloak around my body. "You handled it remarkably well for someone with no training." The casual praise warmed me more than it should have. "What did you mean about prophecy and my mother?" He handed me a goblet of wine, careful to avoid touching my fingers. The Lunar Covenant maintained ancient records, prophecies, bloodlines, the original pacts between wolves and the moon goddess. Among them was a foretelling of a white wolf who would rise during the kingdom's darkest hour, binding old magic to new purpose. I sipped the wine, grateful for its steadying warmth. "And you believe that's me?" Based on fur color and a pendant? His eyes narrowed slightly at my skepticism. Based on the blood rite that showed me your soul, Eden. Based on 5 years of blindness suddenly lifted on a solstice night. Based on the fact that your untrained wolf form is twice the size of any Omega I've ever encountered. Put that way, it did sound somewhat compelling, but my years of invisibility had taught me caution. Even if this prophecy exists, what does it have to do with you claiming me as your mate? That seems politically expedient, given the pressure from other packs. A muscle ticked in his jaw. You think I would use ancient magic, risk blood rites, to solve a political inconvenience? I think you're the Alpha King, I countered, finding courage I didn't know I possessed. I think everything you do serves a purpose. For a moment, he looked genuinely angry, his presence filling the room with dominance that made my newly awakened wolf want to bare her throat. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a short, rusty sound as though he'd nearly forgotten how. 5 years you've watched me, he said. Yet you still don't understand. I've rejected every potential match because none of them called to my wolf. None of them were mine. His eyes locked with mine, intensity blazing in their depths. Until you. The declaration hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. The blood rite confirmed what I sensed the moment I truly saw you today, he finished for me. You are my mate. The only question remaining is whether you will accept the bond. I nearly choked on my wine. Accept? You speak as though I have a choice. His expression darkened. You always have a choice, Eden. I am not my father, who took what he wanted regardless of consent. I am not Renier, who views Omegas as property. The bond requires mutual acceptance to reach its full potential. The idea that the most powerful alpha in the territories would seek my permission for anything was so foreign that I struggled to process it. And if I refuse, then I will still protect you, as I would any subject with rare gifts. You would be moved to safer quarters, given training to control your abilities. His voice remained steady, but I caught a flicker of something like pain in his eyes. And I would continue as I have these 5 years, ruling alone. The thought should have comforted me, an escape from a fate I'd never sought. But instead, it left a hollow ache in my chest. The blood rite had revealed more than just magic. It had shown me his solitude, matching my own in its depth and duration. Why me? I asked softly. I'm no one, a servant without pack or power. You are everything the prophecies described, he countered. And beyond that, you are the first person in 5 years who has seen me as more than a crown or a weapon. You watched me not for advantage, but with understanding. I stared at him, startled by the accuracy of his assessment. Through years of silent observation, I had indeed come to see the man beneath the fearsome ruler, the weight he carried, the isolation he endured, the careful calculations behind each decision that kept peace among naturally violent packs. The Alphas won't accept an Omega Queen, I said, voicing the most practical of many concerns, especially not one of unknown lineage. They will accept what I decree. His tone left no room for argument, yet softened as he added, but their acceptance will come more readily when they see what you truly are. And what am I exactly? I challenged, clutching the cloak tighter. The Omega who carries the blessing of the moon goddess, the white wolf of prophecy. He stepped closer, his scent enveloping me. My mate. The possessive rumble on those last words sent shivers racing across my skin. 5 years I had moved invisible through these halls, wanting nothing more than safety and anonymity. Now this man, this powerful, dangerous alpha, offered me a position that would place me at the center of pack politics, make me a target for his enemies, and bind me irrevocably to his side. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming, and some treacherous part of me wanted it desperately. The blood rite only confirms compatibility, I said carefully. Not commitment. I need time. He inclined his head slightly, a king granting a boon. The winter solstice celebration lasts 3 days. You have until the final moonset to decide. His eyes held mine, serious and intent. But understand this. The magic we've awakened tonight cannot be contained. Word will spread. You are no longer invisible, Eden. As if to emphasize his point, a howl rose from the courtyard below, followed by another, then dozens more as the gathered alphas and their packs responded to the surge of ancient magic that had rippled out from the tower. The wolves had sensed the ritual, perhaps even felt its power. Dominic moved to the window, his powerful silhouette framed against the night sky. They know something has changed. By morning, rumors will fly through every territory. Panic fluttered in my chest. Then let me go now, before they discover it was me. I could leave the castle, the territories. And go where? He challenged, turning back to face me. Without pack protection, how far would you get before being claimed by force? An unclaimed Omega with your rare gifts would be hunted across continents. The truth of his words landed like physical blows. I had no illusions about how the world treated Omegas, especially those with unusual abilities. The packs functioned on power and dominance. Without protection, I was prey. Then what do you suggest? I asked, defeated. Stay in these chambers tonight, he said, his voice gentling. They are the most secure in the castle. Tomorrow, we will face the alphas together. Together? I echoed, disbelieving. As far as they are concerned, you are under my protection now. What form that protection takes is between us alone. He moved toward the door. I'll have suitable clothes brought for you. The adjoining room is prepared if you wish to rest. He was leaving? After everything that had just happened? Where will you go? To address the packs, to ensure none get overexcited by the magic they sensed. His hand rested on the door handle, but he hesitated, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. For what it's worth, I never intended this. 5 years I've ruled without allowing myself attachment of any kind. I believed it weakness, a luxury I couldn't afford. And now, I found myself asking. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Now I wonder if perhaps I've had it backwards all along. Perhaps true strength lies in finding the one person who completes what is broken in us. With that unsettling observation, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. I stood frozen in the center of his chamber, wrapped in his cloak, the taste of his wine still on my lips, and the echo of his words ringing in my ears. Outside, the wolves continued to howl, a chorus of curiosity, excitement, and challenge that made my newly awakened wolf stir restlessly beneath my skin. 5 years of careful invisibility had been shattered in a single night. Whatever path I chose now, there would be no returning to shadows and silence. I moved to the adjoining room he'd mentioned, finding a comfortable space with a large bed covered in furs. As promised, a short time later, a knock at the outer door heralded the arrival of clothing, left discreetly outside by a servant who didn't enter. Not simple servant's garb, but fine things of soft wool and linen, cut to flatter and clearly made for someone of importance. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed me. The strain of my first shift and the emotional tumult of the evening catching up all at once. I sank onto the bed, still clutching Dominic's cloak around me, inhaling his scent with each breath. 3 days to decide my fate. 3 days to determine whether I would bind myself to an alpha who had ignored my existence for 5 years, only to claim me as his prophesied mate in a single night. 3 days to choose between continued solitude and a bond that would place me at the center of pack politics and power struggles. As sleep claimed me, my mother's words echoed through my mind. Remember that you carry the light within the darkness. For the first time, I wondered if she had known exactly what fate awaited me when she left me at the borders of the Northern Territory all those years ago. In my dreams, a white wolf ran through moonlit forests alongside a massive black one, their paths intertwining as naturally as the stars followed their courses across the night sky. Freedom and belonging pulsed between them, a bond more powerful than fear, more enduring than solitude, and somewhere in the distance, the future howled, calling us forward into its uncertain embrace. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant sounds of activity in the castle courtyards below. For one disorienting moment, I thought I'd dreamed everything. The solstice feast, the king's recognition, the blood rite, my first shift. Then I noticed the fine clothing laid out nearby, the luxurious room around me, and the lingering scent of Dominic on the cloak still wrapped around my shoulders. Not a dream then. A new reality. I rose and moved to the window, gazing down at the winter landscape below. The castle was alive with preparations for the second day of solstice celebrations. Servants hurried across the snow-covered courtyards carrying provisions, while alphas and their entourages gathered in small clusters, heads bent in conversation. Even from this distance, the tension was palpable, an electric current running through the gathered packs. They were waiting for something. For me. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I wrapped the cloak more securely around myself before calling, "Enter." To my surprise, it was Mara who stepped inside, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "Eden," she breathed, as though seeing me for the first time. "It's true, then. What have you heard?" I asked cautiously. She closed the door behind her, approaching with a strange hesitancy that made my stomach clench. This woman had ordered me about for 5 years, never showing a hint of deference. Now she looked at me as though I were made of glass, precious and potentially dangerous. "Everyone's talking about the magic that surged through the castle last night," she said, "about how the Alpha King performed the blood rite of recognition with an Omega who glows with the moon goddess's blessing." Her eyes flicked to my hair, then down. "They say she shifted into a white wolf of unusual size, a creature from the old legends." I swallowed hard. "And they know it was me?" "Not all," she admitted. "But rumors spread fast. The king spent half the night in meetings with the Alpha Council, and this morning he announced that he would present his chosen one at tonight's feast." Her expression softened slightly. "I was sent to help you prepare. There are protocols for a royal presentation." Of course there were. Nothing in pack society happened without elaborate ritual, especially not something as significant as the introduction of a potential mate for the Alpha King. "I don't know if I've accepted the position yet," I said carefully, unsure how much Mara knew about my arrangement with Dominic. Something like shock flashed across her face. "You would refuse him?" The question wasn't accusatory, merely incredulous. From her perspective, from any wolf's perspective, the idea of refusing the most powerful alpha in the territories would be unthinkable, especially for an Omega without pack protection. "He's given me until the end of the solstice celebrations to decide," I explained, not entirely sure why I was confiding in her. Mara shook her head in wonderment. 5 years I've worked alongside you, and I never guessed, never sensed. She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Well, decision or no decision, you'll need to look the part tonight. The alphas will be watching your every move, assessing your worthiness." She moved to the clothing laid out on a nearby chair, lifting a gown of deep blue that shimmered with silver threads woven throughout the fabric. This came from the royal stores. The king had it brought up this morning. It's said to have belonged to his mother, before the pack wars. I touched the fabric hesitantly, overwhelmed by the implications. This wasn't just any fine dress. It was a statement of intent, a public declaration that Dominic considered me worthy to wear the previous queen's clothing. "There's a bath prepared in the adjoining chamber," Mara continued, slipping into the practical efficiency that was more familiar territory for both of us. "And I've brought oils for your hair. If you truly carry the moon goddess's blessing, we should emphasize it, not hide it." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparations. Mara, joined by 2 other servants I recognized from the kitchens, treated me with a deference that made me profoundly uncomfortable. These women had been my equals yesterday. Today, they handled me like a precious artifact, something valuable but ultimately separate from themselves. By late afternoon, I stood before a looking glass, barely recognizing the woman reflected there. The blue gown hugged my figure before flowing to the floor in graceful waves, its silver threads catching light with every movement. My pale blonde hair had been partially braided with thin silver chains and small moonstone beads, then left to fall in loose waves down my back. The effect was ethereal, otherworldly, exactly the image of a moon-blessed Omega from legend. Only my mother's pendant, resting against my collarbone, remained familiar. I touched it for reassurance, wondering again if she had foreseen this moment when she abandoned me to the Northern Territory. "You look like something from the old tales," Mara said softly, adjusting the fall of the gown's train. "The alphas won't know whether to challenge you or worship you. I'd prefer neither," I murmured, anxiety clenching in my stomach. After 5 years of carefully cultivated invisibility, The thought of being the center of attention, of critical, calculating attention, made me feel physically ill. A knock at the outer door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Mara hurried to answer it, returning moments later with a guarded expression. "The Alpha King requests your presence in his chambers before the feast," she reported. "He wishes to speak with you privately." My pulse jumped at the prospect of seeing Dominic again. After last night's revelations and the intensity of the blood rite, I wasn't sure what to expect. Would he pressure me for a decision? Instruct me on proper protocol? Or simply check that I hadn't fled during the night? "Thank you, Mara," I said, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from the gown. "And thank you for your help today." She hesitated, then dipped into a shallow curtsy, a gesture that made my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "It was an honor, Lady Eden, Lady Eden." The title felt like an ill-fitting garment, constraining and unfamiliar. I was no lady. I was a servant who had stumbled into magic and prophecy through no action of my own. Yet as I moved through the connecting door into Dominic's chambers, I forced myself to stand straighter, to step with purpose rather than the soft, forgettable tread I'd cultivated for years. If I was to face judgment tonight, I would do so with dignity, regardless of my final decision about the mating bond. Dominic stood at the window as he had the night before, though this time fully dressed in formal attire. Black and silver, the colors of the Northern Territory, with a cloak of midnight fur clasped at one shoulder. He turned as I entered, and for a heartbeat, his careful composure slipped. Something raw and hungry flashed across his face as he took in my appearance, his pupils dilating slightly as they had during the blood rite. I felt an answering pull low in my belly, my wolf stirring beneath my skin in recognition of her potential mate. "Eden," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You look different," I supplied, when he didn't continue. A faint smile curved his lips. "I was going to say, as you were meant to look, but different works as well." He closed the distance between us, moving with the fluid grace that always made me think of predators. "How are you feeling after last night? The first shift can be taxing." His concern seemed genuine, and I found myself responding honestly. "Overwhelmed. Everything feels sharper since the shift. Scents, sounds, emotions." I hesitated, then admitted, "And my wolf is restless. She wants to run, to shift again." Understanding lit his eyes. "That's natural. Once awakened, she won't be content to remain dormant. We'll need to find time for you to shift regularly, to learn control." The casual way he spoke of a future together sent a shiver through me. "You seem very certain of my decision." "I'm certain of nothing," he countered, surprising me, "except that regardless of your choice about the mating bond, your life has changed irrevocably. The white wolf has awakened. She will need guidance." It was a fair point, and one I hadn't fully considered in my fixation on the mating question. My wolf had emerged, powerful and untrained. Without help mastering this new aspect of myself, I could become dangerous to others and to myself. "The alphas are restless," Dominic continued, moving to pour wine from the same decanter we'd shared last night. "The magic we unleashed was felt throughout the territories. Some are afraid. Others are calculating how to use this development to their advantage." "And what advantage do you see in it?" I asked, accepting the goblet he offered. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You still believe this is some political maneuver on my part, isn't it?" I challenged. "A prophesied Omega appearing just when the packs are pressuring you to take a mate, it solves multiple problems at once." "It creates just as many," he pointed out. "An Omega Queen will face challenges no alpha female would. The traditionalists will resist. The ambitious will see you as my weakness to exploit." "Then why do it? Why not choose an alpha female with territory and warriors to contribute?" He set his goblet down with deliberate care. "Because none of them are you." The simple declaration knocked the breath from my lungs. Before I could formulate a response, he continued, "I told you last night, I've ruled alone these 5 years because no potential mate called to my wolf. Political alliances can be forged through treaties. Pack cooperation can be ensured through mutual benefit or threat of force, but a true mate bond, that can't be manufactured or forced." "And you believe that's what we have?" I asked softly. "A true mate bond?" "The blood rite confirmed our compatibility," he said, "but the choice to accept or reject that bond remains yours." I thought of the dreams that had come to me in the night, the white wolf running alongside the black, the freedom and belonging that had pulsed between them. Was that merely fantasy, or a glimpse of what could be? Why did you never notice me before? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Childish, needy, but honest. 5 years, and not a glance. Something like regret shadowed his features. I've asked myself the same question. The best answer I have is that I wasn't ready to see you. He moved closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. After the pack wars, after watching my family slaughtered, I locked away anything that might make me vulnerable. Caring is vulnerability, Eden. Wanting is vulnerability. And now, my voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. Now I wonder if strength lies not in isolation, but in finding the one person who completes what is broken in you. His hand rose, hesitating just short of touching my face. The one person whose soul calls to yours across empty spaces. My heart thundered in my chest, my wolf pushing against my skin, urging me toward this man who spoke of broken things made whole. It would be so easy to lean into his touch, to surrender to the pull between us, to accept a destiny that had been prophesied before my birth. But fear held me back, not just fear of the alphas and their political games, but fear of losing myself, just when I'd begun to discover who I truly was. I need to know who I am before I can belong to someone else, I said, the words painful, but necessary. Even you. Rather than anger, his face showed respect, perhaps even pride. You've survived 5 years among wolves without pack protection, Eden. I think you know exactly who you are, even if you haven't yet embraced it fully. A knock at the door interrupted us, followed by the entrance of a stern beta who served as Dominic's steward. Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty, but the alphas are gathering for the feast. Your presence is expected. Dominic nodded dismissal, then turned back to me as the door closed. Tonight, you will be presented to the alphas as one under my personal protection, a omega of rare gifts being considered as a potential royal mate. Questions about your origins or the prophecy will not be entertained. You will be seated at my right hand, and no one will approach you without my permission. The protective declaration should have chafed, but instead it settled something in me. Whatever came after, tonight, I would not face the alpha's judgment alone. And if they challenge your choice? I asked. A dangerous smile curved his lips. Then they will be reminded why I am king. He offered his arm, the gesture oddly formal after the intensity of our conversation. Are you ready, Eden? No, I wasn't ready, not for the scrutiny, the politics, the life-altering decisions that awaited. But as I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath fine fabric, I realized that ready or not, there was no going back to the shadows. As I'll ever be, I answered, lifting my chin. Together, we left the sanctuary of his chambers and descended toward the great hall, where 12 packs awaited the appearance of their alpha king and the mysterious Omega, who had broken through 5 years of isolation with a single look. The very walls seemed to hold their breath as we approached the massive doors of the great hall. Guards snapped to attention, their eyes widening slightly at the sight of me on the king's arm. Servants paused in their tasks, watching with undisguised curiosity as we passed. Word had spread throughout the castle. The invisible servant girl was invisible no more. With each step toward the gathered alphas, I felt my old life falling away like shed skin. Whether I ultimately accepted the mating bond or not, the Eden who had moved through these halls in silence and fear was gone. In her place walked a woman whose wolf had awakened, whose blood carried ancient magic, whose destiny was somehow entwined with the most powerful alpha in the territories. As the great doors swung open before us, and 100 predatory gazes turned in our direction, Dominic's hand covered mine where it rested on his arm. "Remember," he murmured, so quietly that only I could hear. "No matter what happens in there, you are not alone anymore." The simple promise steadied me as we stepped forward into the light, into the scrutiny of the packs, into a future neither of us could fully predict. The hush that fell over the great hall as we entered was absolute, a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. Every alpha, beta, and the few privileged omegas permitted to attend the royal feast froze, their attention locking onto us with predatory focus. The scent of shock, curiosity, and calculation saturated the air, thick enough that my newly heightened senses could almost taste it. Dominic guided me forward with steady confidence, his hand warm over mine. I forced myself to walk as he did. Spine straight, head high, gaze unwavering. The servant's instinct to lower my eyes, to become invisible, screamed through every nerve ending, but I suppressed it. Tonight, I was not a servant. Tonight, I was whatever they saw reflected in Dominic's treatment of me: potential queen, prophesied Omega, moon-blessed wolf. The whispers began as we approached the high table, rippling through the crowd like wind through tall grass. It's her, the servant from last night. Moon-blessed hair. The prophecy speaks of a white wolf. How can an Omega with no pack? Political suicide. Ancient magic. Did you feel it surge? Dominic's grip tightened fractionally on my hand, a silent reminder of his presence. The high table stood on a dais overlooking the rest of the hall, giving us a clear view of the gathered alphas. I recognized Renier's scowling face among them, his eyes burning with suspicion and something darker. Beside him, Alpha Vanessa of the Western Lakes watched with calculating assessment. Her daughter, the one she'd hoped to present as a mate for Dominic, noticeably absent. We reached the dais, and Dominic guided me to the chair at his right hand, the position traditionally reserved for a mate or honored guest. The symbolism would not be lost on anyone in the hall. As I took my seat, I caught sight of Mara standing among the servants along the wall, her expression a mixture of pride and worry. Only when I was seated did Dominic turn to address the gathered packs, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the hall. Alphas of the 12 territories. He began, the formal greeting silencing the remaining whispers. On this second night of the winter solstice, I present to you Lady Eden, a wolf of rare gifts who stands under my personal protection and consideration as potential royal mate. The declaration sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd, though none dared interrupt. Some of you witnessed the ancient magic awakened last night, Dominic continued. The blood rite of recognition, performed under the solstice moon, revealed what many of you have suspected, that it is time for the northern throne to have a queen. His eyes swept the room, challenging any to object. Lady Eden carries the blessing of the moon goddess, as evidenced by both her rare coloring and the emergence of her wolf form, a white wolf of unusual size and strength. At this, the murmurs grew louder, some alphas leaning forward with increased interest, others exchanging glances of skepticism or concern. Questions regarding her lineage or the prophecies surrounding her appearance will not be entertained, Dominic stated firmly. She will be treated with the respect due her position, or those failing to do so will answer to me directly. The threat hung in the air, clear and uncompromising. No one doubted that challenging the Alpha King's chosen one would result in swift, merciless consequences. After a measured pause, Dominic raised his goblet to the winter solstice and the new beginning it heralds. The Alphas rose as one, raising their own goblets in response, some enthusiastically, others with visible reluctance. To new beginnings, they echoed, their eyes fixed not on their king, but on me. As Dominic took his seat beside me, servants moved forward with the first course of the feast. The formal portion of the presentation was complete, but I knew the real test was just beginning. Now would come the subtle probing, the careful approaches, the assessment of whether I was truly worthy of the position Dominic had thrust me into. You did well, Dominic murmured, his voice pitched for my ears alone. The first hurdle is crossed. They don't seem convinced, I whispered back. Noting the skeptical glances still being cast our way, a slight smile curved his lips. They don't need to be convinced yet. They need only fear challenging me openly while they calculate their next moves. And when they make those moves, we'll be ready. His hand briefly covered mine on the table, a gesture of reassurance that did not go unnoticed by the watchful alphas. Eat. You'll need your strength tonight, I complied, though anxiety made each bite taste like ash. Throughout the meal, various alphas approached the high table to pay their respects, each interaction loaded with unspoken questions and assessments. Dominic fielded most with diplomatic skill, introducing me when necessary but never allowing conversation to veer toward my origins or the prophecy he'd mentioned. As the meal progressed and wine flowed freely, the atmosphere in the hall gradually shifted from tense shock to buzzing speculation. I could feel the weight of stares from every direction, hear my name whispered in conversations throughout the room. The exposure was excruciating after years of carefully constructed anonymity. "Alpha Vanessa approaches," Dominic warned quietly, as the leader of the Western Lakes rose from her table and made her way toward us. Unlike the others, who had approached with cautious deference, Vanessa moved with confident purpose, her expression coolly pleasant, but her eyes sharp with assessment. "My king," she greeted Dominic with a respectful inclination of her head before turning her attention to me. "And Lady Eden, what an unexpected pleasure to make your acquaintance." I nodded in return, grateful for Dominic's briefing on protocol during our preparations. "Alpha Vanessa, the pleasure is mine." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I confess, I find myself curious. 5 years you've served in this castle, yet somehow escaped the notice of everyone, including our keen-eyed king. Then suddenly, on a solstice night, ancient magic awakens and prophecies unfold." She tilted her head slightly. "One might call it convenient timing." The implied accusation hung in the air between us, that this was somehow a ploy, a manipulation, perhaps even a conspiracy. Before Dominic could intervene, I found myself responding, "Or one might call it fate, Alpha Vanessa. The moon goddess reveals her purposes in her own time, not ours." Surprise flickered across her features. Clearly she had expected either timid deference or defensive anger, not calm acceptance wrapped in spiritual conviction. Beside me, I sensed Dominic's approval in the subtle relaxation of his posture. "Indeed," Vanessa conceded after a moment, "the ways of the goddess are mysterious." Still, I had hoped my daughter might have had the opportunity to be considered before such mystical interventions occurred. "Your daughter is a credit to your bloodline," Dominic interjected smoothly. "But as you've witnessed, some choices are made for us by powers beyond our control." The diplomatic response did little to soften Vanessa's skepticism, but she was too skilled a politician to press further in such a public setting. With another cool smile, she retreated, immediately conferring with alphas from allied territories. "That went better than expected," Dominic murmured. "She doesn't believe in the prophecy," I noted. "Few of them do, entirely," he admitted. "But belief is less important than proof, which will come in time." His eyes met mine, serious and intent. "If you choose to stay." The reminder of my pending decision sent a wave of anxiety through me. Around us, the feast continued, music now filling the hall as some of the younger wolves began to dance in the cleared space before the high table. The celebration would continue for hours yet, with more food, more wine, more careful assessment of the Alpha King's mysterious chosen one. "May I be excused for a moment?" I asked, suddenly desperate for a brief respite from the unrelenting scrutiny. Dominic studied my face, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Of course. Mara can accompany you." He gestured, and Mara detached herself from the line of servants, moving to my side as I rose. Together, we slipped through a side door that led to a small antechamber off the main hall. The moment the door closed behind us, I sagged against the wall, drawing deep breaths of air uncontaminated by the sense of too many dominant wolves in one space. "You're doing remarkably well," Mara said, her voice gentle. "Many Omegas would have broken under that kind of alpha attention." "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's skin," I confessed. "Yesterday I was invisible. Today I'm supposedly the fulfillment of prophecy. Perhaps you were always both," she suggested, the invisible girl with destiny sleeping inside her, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Her perspective startled me, not because it was implausible, but because it resonated with something deep within me. My mother's pendant seemed to warm against my skin, as though in agreement. "I don't know if I can be what they expect," I whispered. "What he expects." Mara's expression softened with unexpected compassion. "Perhaps the question isn't what they expect you to be, but what you discover you already are." Before I could respond, the door opened again, revealing not Dominic as I'd expected, but Alpha Renier, his eyes gleaming with triumph at finding me alone, or nearly so, as he dismissed Mara's presence with a contemptuous glance. Lady Eden. He all but purred my new title, closing the door behind him. How fortunate to find you without your royal shadow. Alarm shot through me, but I forced myself to remain outwardly calm. Alpha Renier. I was just returning to the feast. Were you? He moved to block my path to the door, not touching me but using his larger frame to establish dominance. I thought perhaps we might have a private conversation first. Alpha to Omega. I'm not an alpha, I pointed out, careful to keep my voice steady. He chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. No, but you're playing in alpha politics now, aren't you? A servant girl suddenly elevated to royal consideration. One has to wonder what special talents earned you such recognition. The insinuation was clear, and anger flared hot in my chest. My wolf stirred beneath my skin, responding to the threat with a desire to show fangs, rather than submission. The king explained my position quite clearly, I said, taking a deliberate step to the side, away from the wall where he'd nearly trapped me. If you have questions, perhaps you should direct them to him. Renier moved with surprising speed, his hand shooting out to grasp my arm, or perhaps you could answer them yourself. What magic did you work on him, little Omega? What tricks did you employ to ensnare the most powerful alpha in the territories when so many suitable matches have failed? The contact sent a jolt of revulsion through me, my wolf howling in outrage at being handled by an alpha who was not our chosen mate. Without conscious thought, I felt my eyes shift, human irises giving way to the gold of my wolf. Remove your hand, I said, my voice dropping to a growl that seemed to emerge from somewhere primal within me. Surprise flickered across his face, followed quickly by anger. You dare command me? You forget your place, Omega, and you forget whose protection she stands under. The new voice came from the doorway, which had opened silently to reveal Dominic. His expression was terrifyingly calm, but power radiated from him in palpable waves, filling the small chamber with the scent of dominant alpha rage barely contained. Renier released me immediately, taking a step back. My king. I was just having a conversation with your guest. A conversation that required physical contact? Dominic's voice remained conversational, which somehow made it more frightening. A conversation in a private chamber, away from witnesses. There seems to be a misunderstanding, Renier began, but fell silent as Dominic took a single step forward. The only misunderstanding, Dominic said quietly, is yours, if you believed you could touch what is mine without consequences. The possessive declaration sent a shiver through me, not of fear, but of something more complex. My wolf responded to his claim with satisfaction, rather than rebellion, recognizing in this moment what my human mind still questioned. That somehow, in ways I didn't fully comprehend, I did belong to this man, and more surprisingly, he belonged to me. She approached me, Renier lied desperately, sensing the danger he was in, asked for private words, careful. Dominic interrupted, his eyes now glowing with alpha power. Lies only deepen the offense.